Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon to the viewers in Malaysia and early evening now in Australia. Uh, we are going to be discussing the topic on the Bondi killings, as well as the kidnapping of Maduro by Trump, and hopefully, inshallah, we'll be discussing also the latest development in Iran. So we have with us this afternoon our usual guests, experts on the issue of Palestine and international law. We have Professor Peter Slizak, who is an honorary associate professor at University of New South Wales, Sydney. He is a professor of philosophy of science and also an activist for the Palestinian cause, and also a member of Jewish Independent Voices, I think, in Sydney. Welcome, Peter. Thank you again
Thank you.
for your kind
Yeah,
willingness to talk to us. And
thank
we
you.
also have Professor Saul Takahashi, who is now a professor at the New York University in Abu Dhabi. He was a professor at Osaka Jogakuin University in Japan before this. And also before that, he was a senior official of the United Nations at the United Nations Commissioner on Human Rights, Office of the Commissioner of Human Rights in occupied territories. He's also a lawyer, human rights lawyer. Welcome, gentlemen. So I will start with you, Peter. I understand the Australian Parliament returns today, and it began with a moment of silence for the murdered victims at the Bondi Beach. But then when I read the news report, I saw that some Jews were blaming the Australian government for the killing, saying that they didn't do enough to stop the Muslims, and also because because Australia said they are going to recognize Palestine. So I'm wondering, uh, we both of us, or all of us, know that the genocide in Gaza is the main factor that caused this hatred or this extreme reaction by some radical Muslims. But can you share with us the sentiment of most Jews in Australia? Is their support for Zionism and Israel strengthened or weakened by the Bondi killings? Peter.
Well, it's a tough question you're asking. Look, just to respond to some of the things you said, it's been a scandal. The whole response to this has been an outrage. And the first thing to mention is that Netanyahu intervened immediately by blaming the prime minister. Now, I have no love for our prime minister, and most Palestinians share my contempt, I can put it so strongly, for his inaction over Gaza. But on this occasion, one has to say that whatever exactly were the motives of the killers on Bondi, the fact that Albanese, Prime Minister, belatedly recognized the state of Palestine can hardly be blamed for the massacre. It's an outrageous nonsense which the Prime Minister of Israel had the gall to say publicly. I mean, even the worst Zionist supporters of Israel would reject this. Well, I'm probably exaggerating because they accept any stupid, excuse. So that's the second part of your question. Quickly, if you're asking what's the reaction of the Jewish community, and especially in the Parliament, they are basically pandering to the hysteria about mostly fake anti-Semitism, and they are latching onto this really tragedy and terrorism on Bondi as if it vindicates their hysteria, unfounded hysteria about anti-Semitism. I made an unfortunate post on a private email which got public where I somewhat uncharitably put it like this, that the worst journalist, propagandist, Zionist, I said unkindly, she couldn't believe her luck. That's a little bit cruel because I mean, that's a very unkind way to say that this confirmed what had been unfounded hysteria about anti-Semitism, and now there's a real case. So a real case comes along, but it has to be said also immediately, we don't know exactly what their motives were. Fortunately, I was praying, I'm not even religious, but I was praying that they weren't Palestinian. And it looks clear that their motives weren't based on, at least they're not Palestinians, and may have completely other motives, but they haven't been interviewed. The surviving young one, we don't know exactly. The fact that it was a Jewish target, as you, I think, put it in your remarks, it's hard to say this. People are reluctant to talk about it in a way which I think we must talk about it. And I make the comparison first with September 11 in America. It was obvious to anybody, but it was unspeakable to say what they've used the term blowback. That it's not to approve of what happened on September 11 in 2001 in America to say that it was a predictable a reaction against America's rampages in Iraq and elsewhere. Understandable, perhaps, but not to justify it. Now, here I think the parallel is the same. The fact that Jews would become a target for some outrageous acts of terrorism is not surprising when, to answer your question directly, the vast majority of the Jewish community are enthusiastic supporters of the genocide. That's putting it directly. They cover themselves in Israeli flags, even at the massacre site, where they went down to express their condolences. Many of the Jewish people wore an Israeli flag on their shoulders. Well, this is the difficulty. And just to qualify that, fortunately, there is a small group, as you mentioned, my earlier Independent Australian Jewish Voices initiative. There's a small minority, but now a significant group of Jews under the label of the Australian, Jewish Council of Australia, who are anti-Zionist and very public and dissociating themselves from Zionism and from the crimes of the State of Israel. That's a very important development to show that you can be a Jew, in some cases even a religious Jew, and dissociate yourself from Israel and Zionism. So, but just to emphasize, sadly, not only the majority of certainly all the peak Jewish organizations supporting Israel, regardless of the atrocities and genocide, it doesn't matter how bad it is. Worse than that, the government has been pandering to them. We are now organizing and setting up inquiries and royal commissions, and the Prime Minister has accepted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. It's a shocking tragedy that they are simply falling over themselves for what has mostly been fake anti-Semitism acts, which turned out to be not genuine. They were put up by some fake outfit. So this is a very, very difficult situation. Has become much worse than it was before.
Thank you for that remarks. But if I ask personally, as a Jew, how difficult was it for you to express an opinion about the killings? Because I remember you told me that you were disappointed with Peter Beinart when he spoke about the incident immediately after it happened. Yeah.
Look, I'm a great fan of Peter Beinart. So I really don't like being critical of him because he's a great hero. I have to say that, I mean, his history. I met him a year or so ago when he came to Sydney, talked to him for about 15 minutes. And I jokingly said to him, look, he finally came around and even rejected the idea of a Jewish state. And I joked with him. I said, what took you so long? Well, that was really a joke because for him, it was hard. He was an Orthodox Jew and a seriously committed Jew. I'm not. I'm an atheist, renegade. And for me, my history meant that it wasn't difficult. For someone like Peter Beinart, it's very significant that he came to that point, and I admire him enormously for that. He gets a lot of flack for various reasons. But it was a bit disappointing that those remarks I think I said to you that they were a little bit too focused on what happened without asking the obvious questions about what would motivate people to attack the Jews for the reasons I indicated. And look, I'm sure he would agree with me. I mean, this was in the heat of the moment and the tragedy, which is very serious. And so I'm not being critical of him.
Okay. I think he's told. He changed his tone a bit, but I think we can understandably after the killings, you have to be very careful about what you say, right?
Well, that's the problem.
Yeah, but the latest incident again is the cancellation of the Writers' Festival.
Yeah.
because the board decided to disinvite Dr. Randa Al-Fatah.
Yeah.
But now they have apologized to, right?
The
Apologized to her.
new committee apologized, not the
New
previous committee.
No, not the previous committee.
No, the previous one resigned.
Oh,
The people
okay.
who had disinvited her after the debacle, when
Huh?
practically all of the speakers withdrew, the committee resigned, and a new committee came, and they unreservedly apologized. They offered to reinvite her next year, and it's a new regime now. But it has been an intense scandal, and in some ways, it's very pleasing because she was vindicated.
Mm-hmm.
What it tells you, it's very revealing that she, of course, had nothing to do with Bondi. I mean, and I agree with everything she says. She's not anti-Semitic, but of course, a part of the problem, as you can see, she's smeared, and her name is blackened by the Zionists, and they misrepresent what she says in the most awful ways. And the idea that the festival organizer would even dream of canceling her, who had nothing, what kind of stupid, like offensive idea would it be to cancel a Palestinian person as if their presence is some kind of a threat or embarrassment? Look, it's too grotesque. But anyway, the good news is that the backlash was immense. And the new committee, as I said, have apologized.
So the backlash and the bravery of the new committee, is this a positive sign, therefore, that actually the influence of the Israeli lobby is now waning a bit,
That's
despite
a bit too optimistic. They keep getting beaten up. I mean, the ABC announcer Latouf, who was first dismissed and then vindicated by a court case. There are repeated examples of this, like in both cases of Palestinian or Arabs, and they keep losing these cases, but they don't learn the lesson from it. They're not in any way chastened, and they, in a way, I'm involved in another court case. The most prominent and most wonderful journalist, Kostakidis, Mary Kostakidis, is being pursued, being hounded by the Zionists, and she's having to undertake an expensive court case. They don't give up. And sadly, even if we win in these cases, we lose, because it takes an enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of time. It distracts us from Gaza. It's a distraction from the horrors of the genocide. And in a funny way, they lose every time, but they sort of win.
Okay. So it's a mixed picture. I find it very interesting. Very interesting because I want to be optimistic all the time. Of course, I want to be
Me too.
optimistic. But you are very reluctant to see the optimistic picture. You are
I
very
think things
serious.
have gotten a lot worse. I have to say, things are much harder now for us. I mean, we're not allowed to have rallies anymore. You know very well. You came to one when we were in Sydney. I've been every rally for 2 years for Gaza. Do you know that they've now banned the rallies because it's somehow too? I mean, it's got nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Because when I speak at the rallies, I always make it clear that there are Jews present, and we repudiate anti-Semitism like all forms of racism. And the bloody government now cancels peaceful protests for human rights and so on. Because of this. So this kind of situation is much worse than it has ever been now.
Oh, okay. I didn't know about that. So
Yeah.
that's a very, very fundamental right to gather and to express opinion, and you can't do that now.
Yeah. They're using legal, they're being challenged, but this is the kind of clamping down on dissent and protest, which is perfectly legal and moral and in favor of international law.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Saul, you have any from far away? You observing what happened in Australia? Any comment as an outsider from far away?
I mean, I don't really have that much to add because I think Peter, as always, has really much said everything. I mean, it's been really obvious and really outrageous how the Australian authorities and how, Zionist elements have jumped on what happened and, abusing it for their own ends. I did read about the ban on rallies and protests. And it's outrageous. It has absolutely nothing to do with the killings on the beach on Bondi. I guess pronounce it Bondi. I guess I've been pronouncing it wrong. The Bondi Beach is, has nothing to do with it. Like you correctly pointed out, Peter, that we know very little about, the motives, about what happened. We don't even know if there were any terrorist motives. I mean, we just don't know. But of course, as we are always pointing out, you're innocent until proven Muslim. And any time that a Muslim or an Arab or anybody with an Arab sounding name, or even expanding it, anybody with brown skin or black skin, anytime they commit one of these crimes, automatically there are these terrorist motives ascribed to it, and everybody jumps up and down and tries to use what happened for their own end. So it really is terrible. And like you say, Peter, I see this, we've seen this over the past 2 years in particular, not just in Australia, but of course the United States and all throughout the West, pretty much. This bogus narrative that there's this wave of anti-Semitism, and they trot out these numbers, which are basically based on the IHRA definition.
That's
So
exactly
basically, it's a definition which is designed to, to create this pretext for further repression. It's designed to make sure that the numbers just explode. And, now, of course, lo and behold, as everybody had predicted, they're coming back and saying, well, see, anti-Semitism, so we have to do something. But it really is, dark days all around, really dark days obviously dark days for the Palestinian people in many ways, but also dark days for freedom of expression in many countries in the rest of the world. It's really frightening stuff. I was just saying last year, I lived in Europe for quite a long time, but funnily enough, Spain was the country that I never managed to go to. I did a lot of touring things and personal tourism and a lot of sort of work-related travel, and I went all over the place. But Spain was the big one that I had never been to. But last year, I went to Spain 3 times. I had 3 conferences in Spain, pretty much all of which were conferences that had been initially planned for other countries in Europe. But the organizers realized, look, this is a little bit dodgy, it's a little bit dangerous, we can't do it. So they all moved to Spain. And that's where we are now. I mean, it's wonderful that I managed to go to Spain, and the conferences were excellent. But that's where we are now. It's freedom of expression, except when it comes to our beautiful Israel. Human rights, respect for international law, except when it comes to Palestine. Respect for democracy, promotion of democracy, except when it comes, for those brownies, voting for people that we don't like, this kind of thing. So it's, it's true to the par, but it's frightening and it's outrageous. And we have to keep on fighting against it.
Can I add one thing to what you're saying, Saul? The IHRA definition has been problematic for another reason. Apart from its outrageousness, and a huge number of Jewish and experts on the Holocaust have come out and repudiated it. And you're probably aware that they formulated a thing called the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism, the JDA. I've been very unhappy that it hasn't got traction here. And the Palestinian organizations, I think they've shot themselves in the foot because they're not adopting this. The Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism avoids saying anything about Israel. If you need it, you shouldn't have to have a definition, because some anti-racist policies and laws should be adequate. But given the context, if you need one, these significant figures, and it was written about by other significant Jews, this will at least give you something which you can embrace if you want to stand up against anti-Semitism. And to I think their shame, the Palestinian organizations, for some stupid reasons, I'm sorry to be so critical, I have to say this, have rejected it. And now they're empty-handed. They haven't got any way to push back. If you have to, fly the flag and stand up against anti-Semitism, it's no point just belly aching and criticizing IHRA, because the government and everybody else is grasping for something to show their credentials, and we're not giving them anything. And I think this is a very bad losing strategy for us.
Okay, so Peter, please explain when you say that The Palestinians. We are talking about the Palestinian state or the Palestinian community,
No,
or
the activist movement here.
the activist movement. Okay. All right.
The leading, I was on the executive and one of the founding members of Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network. They do wonderful work. They're the premier umbrella Palestine activist organization. They're very prominent, doing very, very good work. But for various reasons, there was some article that appeared that made some pseudo-academic arguments about settler colonialism or something, and they were unhappy that the alternative definition was drafted by a bunch of Jews. I mean, it's insane. I'm sorry to say, for the Palestinians to object to the fact that Palestinians weren't consulted. This is about anti-Semitism, and the leading experts on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism drafted this in order to avoid the collapsing of criticism of Israel with criticism of Jews. It's just obvious. And look, you know, people aren't always their own best friends. They're their own worst enemies often. And I'm afraid to say that and a lot of the activists aren't even aware of the Jerusalem Declaration. So I'm going around now, especially when the government is trying to legislate, and this stupid woman our prime minister appointed the worst propagandist Zionist representative of the worst organization as the advisor, the so-called envoy of anti-Semitism. They couldn't have picked a worse person. And they're promoting this IHRA and a whole list of other. They're going to criminalize, or at least make some sort of offense. For example, holding a picture of a watermelon, or saying from the river to the sea. Every rally when I speak, I make a point of saying, as we all do, and by the way, the leading spokesman for the Palestinians, like Nasser Mashni, the president, and others, we always explain what we mean. And we mean equality for Palestinians and Jews in the Holy Land, from the river to the sea. It doesn't matter how explicitly we say it's an inclusive claim for justice for everybody. They will always portray it as a genocidal, wanting to kill all the Jews. It's just shocking. So we're losing the propaganda battle, because I think they're not necessarily playing that card as effectively as they should.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, we want to move on to topic on Maduro. So, can you please explain to us this thing about the U.S. going over to another country and kidnapping a leader?
I'll leave that to Saul.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, Saul.
Well, look, there's nothing really to explain. I mean, certainly there's no legal justification for this in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's not even worth, spending any kind of time and energy thinking about the legalities and trying to sort of, rebut arguments. I mean, one of the things that you have to say about Trump and his fascist cronies that he has surrounded himself with is they do make things easy for us in the sense that they don't try to, if anything, they are very clear. I mean, they don't go out of their way to try to come up with legalities and legal niceties and justifications, because they feel like the Israelis do. That they can do whatever they want. There are no constraints, legal, moral, or any kind of norm-related universal type constraints on what they want to do. Might makes right, and rules are for wimps. Basically, that's the attitude. So, they haven't. I remember, when the Americans invaded Iraq, of course, in 2003, and they tried to get authorization from the Security Council. And I remember Colin Powell, bringing out these big boards. He was trying to sort of copy what they did with Cuba, in the 60s. And it didn't work. But, the point is they made an effort. I mean, arguably it was half-hearted. Arguably it was always doomed from the start. But the point is that they made an effort. Whereas what we have now is there's no even attempt at maintaining a facade of legality and maintaining any kind of facade of respect for international law. I mean, Trump himself said it very clearly. I don't need international law. I have my own morality. I mean, we're talking. Yeah, I mean,
Yes, we
we laugh, but I mean, I mean, I would say that's a pretty low bar, but it's basically no bar. I mean, there is no bar. This is how terrible it is. But so, in that regard, there's almost like nothing to say. They went in, clearly it was, predominantly, I would say almost 100% about oil, but also about just showing who's boss,
Mm.
uh, pushing around the weakest kid on the block to show that, hey, I'm the tough one, I'm the bully, and you can't say no to me. I mean, that's really what it was.
Yeah.
Um, there was, of course, an Israel connection, or perhaps I would say more a little bit more directly an Iran connection in the way that they had presented things, and these tankers were allegedly connected. They were going to go to Iran, or they were shipping oil to Iran. They were busting the sanctions, and Hezbollah was using Venezuelan banks to launder money. I mean, all these kind of things, and perhaps some of these things are true, but that in no way sort of would justify what they wanted to do. And very quickly after this operation, again, Trump started talking oil. I mean, what has he been saying? All he's been saying is oil, 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 oil. All of these, bogus sort of ideas of, combating narco terrorism. I mean, I don't think anybody believed them.
Mm.
And sure as the light of day. I mean, the instant they kidnapped Maduro, then all of a sudden, that nobody's talking about that. Nobody in the U.S. government has been even mentioning narco terrorism. Nobody, to my understanding, has mentioned drugs at all. It's all about the oil. Now we're going to control the oil. The oil is ours, and it's very, very open. I mean, you got to say this. You got to hand it to these guys. They don't hide their intent.
Yeah.
They don't hide how imperialist and
Yeah,
what
okay.
bullies they are.
But a factor which, as an observer, I can see that he was willing to do that, or not scared to do that, is because he thinks that he can get some support from within Venezuela itself. Apparently, I read somewhere that he was already, Trump was already, or CIA was already working inside there, working with the military, and that was the reason why they could come in without much opposition. None of their soldiers were killed during the operation. So inside Venezuela itself, there is a support. There is a a yearning to get rid of Maduro. Maybe is another factor that encouraged Trump to do that?
Well,
Internal
look,
problems.
I mean, look, I'm not such an expert on Venezuelan politics and, the level of support that Maduro had. I've heard both things. I've seen certainly on the television, and I've seen reports of, both demonstrations within Venezuela that have, expressed support for what happened. And I've seen other, very pro-Maduro demonstrations as well on TV. I don't really know what to say. I mean, of course, you'll always have collaborators. And unfortunately, my experience in Palestine and, looking at the history of Palestine also shows, unfortunately, the imperialist powers have tools at their hands, which will always, help them cultivate and create and attract collaborators within any kind of, enemy. So, I'm not so surprised to hear that. But and maybe there were elements in the Venezuelan elite that wanted to get rid of Maduro. Again, I don't really know, but that doesn't mean that what happened was legal for sure. I
Okay.
mean, what happened, as soon as Maduro was abducted and taken to the US, of course, I saw I saw a couple of commentators, a couple of articles saying, okay, expect to hear a lot of bad things about Maduro over the coming days. Expect to hear a lot of, negative reporting about how oppressive he was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, of course, I mean, of course, I had expected it as well. I think we all did. And, lo and behold, that's what's been happening. So, and just like with Iran, I mean, you mentioned that we might sort of touch on Iran, and of course that has very, very direct implications for Palestine, the country that is so dear to our hearts. And throughout what's been happening, these protests that have been taking place in Iran, I mean, the coverage by the certainly the U.S. media, the UK media, the English-speaking media in general, well, certainly the U.S. and the UK. I mean, it's just been I've been a bit baffling. I mean, mind-boggling. It's like, what kind of planet do these people actually live on? They're talking about the son of the Shah, of Iran. You know, whose photograph must be in the dictionary under,
Mm.
corrupt and evil despot, right? And
American agent.
yeah, exactly. And he's being trotted out. The son is being trotted out as, the rising star and somebody who has huge amounts of support in Iran. And all we have to do is, topple the mullahs and everything's going to be fine. And we're going to have a really good pro-business, pro-US oil company leader in Iran. I mean, what kind of planet do these people live on? And again, and the thing is, it's also it's hilarious because it's the same playbook over and over. This is
Exactly.
I think the term playbook is actually a North American expression because it's
That's
from
right.
the playbook that you get in football. But it's the same plays over and over and over.
Yes.
We're going to get somebody who's one of our collaborators who's spent most of his life abroad and and living with us and cultivating contacts in the Heritage Foundation and these other Republican think tanks in Washington, D.C. And we're going to parachute, we're going to bomb everybody in submission and parachute our guy into there, and then everything is going to be fine. And it's just like, we've seen this movie before,
Yeah.
and it doesn't end well. And so far it looks like the U.S. has backed off from direct military confrontation, and that's a good thing. I mean, inshallah, it'll continue that way. But it's a very, very dangerous situation and very, very, very worrying for sure.
Okay, Peter,
Can
anything?
I just add to that? Of course, what Sol said is very important. The only thing I'd add to that is that, and I was thinking of when you mentioned the playbook, the reason they can get away with it is because the general public don't know that history in the playbook. I mean, I can just think off the top of my head, of practically every country in Latin America where they pulled the same stunt, where they create a coup d'état. Chile, well, of Cuba, of course, and Guatemala, and the banana stories, and then of course in Iran with Mossadegh and the replacement back then and installing the Shah. I mean, your point is so important because the public generally don't know the history. The number of times the Americans have been responsible for installing a puppet. Vietnam was a case. I mean, look, I learned all this when I first became a bit politically aware by reading Chomsky, when he just, the litany of these examples, most people don't know. I didn't know. And your point is so important, not only because of the fact, but the fact that nobody knows that this is part of a pattern.
But
You have a
the outcome of it is apparently he has managed to intimidate leaders, like for example, Colombia. Now the guys are now willing to talk to him or something. Like I from my assessment is that he's worried in case Trump will do the same to him. Therefore, it's now better not to take too confrontational a stance against America now, in order to prevent, so that Trump will not kidnap him and then take him back to New York.
well,
In other words, the playbook seems to be very successful intimidating foreign leaders who are against the U.S. hegemony.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, one thing, I mean, like looking at, for example, the Europeans, at least, I mean, they're the most prominent example. One thing I've been thinking is, everybody, I think, who grew up and actually went to school, we learn things. You learn things in school and you learn things in the playground after school. And one of the things, certainly growing up in North America, one of the first things I learned was that you never appease a bully. You never give in to a bully because he's never going to stop.
Mm.
You have to fight back. And it almost like it doesn't, in a way, even if you lose, even if punches the lights out of you, you've shown him that you will push back and he respects that. But I don't know. I don't know if that's something that you learn in European playgrounds as kids. I really don't know. But I think a lot of these leaders haven't, learned that lesson. Look, Trump, and that's the Europeans when we're talking about, and mind you, when we're talking about Denmark and Greenland, I mean, never say never. But of course, it's always very easier for the U.S. to contemplate doing these kind of things, not just the political elite in the U.S., but also the American public, to contemplate doing these kind of things in their backyard. And Latin America is, let's face it, it is their backyard, like we always used to say about Mexico, so close to the United States, so far from God. So, they are very unfortunate for having this geography. So it's easier for the US to do this kind of thing, and it's probably easier for the US to intimidate leaders, even easier than it has been for the Europeans. But look, the thing is, even if Trump gets his way in the immediate term, and in some ways he has been, like with Venezuela he's got his way. Let's see what happens with the oil. Exxon said publicly that Venezuela was uninvestable, so maybe it will not happen. Maybe he won't get what he wants in the end, but let's see. But he in the immediate term, like most petulant crying toddlers, he does get what he wants. He gets the candy. But the long term, even the midterm damage that's being done to international law and the global system as a whole, and also even if the American elite don't care about that, the damage that's being done to American standing and American, international relations in the mid to long term is just incalculable. The thing is, and I don't know what it is. I don't know why Americans don't understand this. But even if you remember when Biden was elected and he came back and his big mantra was America is back. Those terrible 4 years are gone and we're just going to forget about them, and America is back, standing up for democracy and working with its allies and standing up for peace and human rights, except in Palestine, of course, because who cares about them? But that was okay, a different thing. But that was the narrative. And the thing is, what the rest of the world, decision makers, the political elite, what the rest of the world is thinking now is, we're never going to trust the United States again. We're never going to enter into an agreement with the Americans. If I were, the legal advisor to the Prime Minister of Australia or any other country, I would say, look, you do not sign anything with the Americans. I don't care if Trump, gets kicked out in a few years and, the Democrats come back and it's more reasonable. I don't care. 4 years down the line, what's going to happen? These guys could come back. They've proved that. They've proven that they could come back to power and overwhelm the rest of the world. So this country is unreliable. You cannot trust them. So, that's what's happening now. And the damage to American interests, and I'm not advocating for American interests anyway, but even if they don't care about the global system, I guess they don't. Even if they don't care about the UN and international law in general, I guess they don't. But they do care about American interests, or they should, in the mid to long term. And the damage that's being done is just, I think, unfathomable. And that's really going to come back and bite them. It might not bite Donald Trump. He's making bucket loads of money, and he's gonna retire from the political scene, even richer than he was, I suppose. And that was, one of the big goals.
Yeah,
But the damage done to the country as a whole is incalculable, I think.
But it seems that he wants to set up some kind of a pseudo UN thing controlled by them. This peace board, the board of peace, which is asking countries that want to be it initially started in order to govern Gaza, right? That's what the idea is, which is still not settled because Hamas is not going to disarm, and Israel is not withdrawing from the 52% that they are controlling now.
I mean,
but now he is asking countries, inviting countries to be members of the board of peace, and then I read that he said that you can be a member for 3 years, and as long as you pay $1 billion USD or something like that. What is happening? Did you read about it, Peter? I want to get Peter's or Saul. Can you comment on that one?
Well, I'm sorry, Peter, I don't mean to butt in, but
No, go ahead. You know better than I do.
well, yeah, I mean, apparently what this Board of Peace is envisaged as taking over from, it's set to expand, and it's supposed to be taking over from other, I can't remember the exact language, but other international organizations that have clearly failed, things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is so, again, one thing you got to say about Trump and his fascist minions is that they don't hide anything. There's no facade of democracy or principles. The principles is, I, me, mine, and my money. That's what it is. And apparently they've been inviting, like they're inviting Erdogan, they're inviting Sisi, they're inviting all these kind of figures that Trump has a personal liking to, that Trump and his cronies are involved, it seems, in sort of backroom financial dealings with. That's what this is about. And the thing is, I mean, it's all disgusting. It's all terrible. When it comes to Gaza, of course, it is absolutely an outrage that this was endorsed by the UN Security Council. There really is no excuse for this, and there is no, I think that was really the nail in the coffin of the global system and the international system. No longer can we go back and look at the UN to stand up for Palestinian rights at the very least, and stand up for national self-determination anywhere if this is what's going to happen. Not one country on the Security Council had the guts to say no to this. I mean, it was a scandal. Really, it was a scandal. But so that has to be said. At the same time, in many ways, like with a lot of things with Trump, this is just turning into a joke. I mean, it's a sick joke, and it's a terrible joke if you're on the receiving end of it, which the Palestinian people, of course, are. But nothing is actually moving. Nothing is actually happening. Right now, finally, we're talking about people. He started off saying, well, the Board of Peace is going to be, stacked with international leaders and, the most prominent people you've ever heard of, and, the typical sort of generic superlatives that he always uses. And then, I think honestly, people just didn't want to have anything to do with it, which is why it took much longer than they had said. And now now they're falling back to the usual suspects, the guys he knows or he thinks he can strong arm into, into a position of subjugation and sort of at least filling up these chairs. And the same with the ISF, this international, was it the stabilization force? To my knowledge, no country has said they're going to be part of this yet. None. They at the beginning there was talk, but then the UAE came quickly and saying, okay, no, we're not going to have anything to do with this. The Indonesians are still sort of neither here nor there, and they're the country that I hear usually, the first country that I hear usually when I hear about the country that seems, willing to take part of it. There's questions about the Turkish military and all these countries, but no country has come out and said that they're going to be part of it, to my knowledge. And it's not hard to see why. I mean, again, it's this petulant toddler syndrome, right? I want the candy, I want it, I want it, I want it. He gets a tantrum, he gets the candy, but then he has a bite of the candy and he throws it down on the floor, and then he wants another candy. He's forgotten about it. This is the attention span of this guy. And so, all these details which really need to be sorted out, the fact that it is a complete outrage and violation of international, even aside, all these sort of planning and the details that have to be sorted out and everything, nothing was done. It sort of reminds me of Brexit, actually. It's like, oh yeah, we won the vote. Oh yeah, what are we going to do now? It's sort of like, none of these things are sorted out. So I don't know what really is going to happen. Certainly what is happening now is the Israelis are looking. Obviously, they have a very privileged position in Washington and within the administration. So, they're privy to the inside information. They have a lot of levers that they can and surely are using. And they're, using the situation to their advantage. Every day they are expanding this part of Gaza, which they are allowed to remain in, the yellow line is called. And so they are, they're pushing the yellow line. They're killing more and more Gazans. What they're doing in the West Bank, again, another Nakba. So, they're taking advantage of the situation. It benefits them. This lack of clarity means nothing really happens, nothing really moves. If the ISF is put into place, then that'll make life much more complicated for the Israelis, which is why it seems, and I don't know how much truth there is to this narrative, but it seems that they're kicking and screaming about the Turks being involved in it, because this is a country that they can't bully and they can't intimidate. So, having the ISF there, having these things clarified, and this progressing would actually make life very complicated for the Israelis. So, that's something they probably don't want. Let's see what happens. But, the notion that this board of peace would replace the UN and replace the international, be the core of the next international system, I mean, it's almost too terrible to contemplate. But I'm going to start teaching tomorrow, the next term, so maybe I got to start talking about this. I mean, it's just awful. It's too terrible to contemplate, really.
I didn't know that the Security Council had approved this plan.
Well,
How do
they
you understand
approved.
that?
Yeah, I mean, the resolution in November, I think it was
Yeah,
the
that was
18th.
it was passed by the UNSC.
Yeah.
But we were thinking, everybody was discussing that the United Nations is useless. But now things are getting worse because basically Americans are saying we want to get rid of UN and we want to run the world by ourselves. Apparently, that seems to be the situation now. They couldn't be bothered to go to UNSC now, right? For example, the operation in Venezuela was without the UNSC's approval, so they want to do on their own. But I want to ask Peter, because you also follow what's happening in the US now. This ICE thing, the killing in Minneapolis, and the anger and the demonstrations and protests in the US against the ICE, also against Trump. So despite the horrors and the illegal things that Trump is doing outside, but inside the country itself, he is facing a lot of trouble, right? A lot of anger among Americans. So how do you see things are going to develop in America in the future?
Well, look, I will hand it over to Saul in a minute, but I just say that I saw one hopeful sign, if it was real. I saw that some local police, I think in Minneapolis, were actually confronting the ICE people. I think I saw one of the local police take the mask off an ICE person and confront them. If that's at all typical, that's a hopeful sign. But the ICE have been, I mean, I can't help making the analogies with the Gestapo in Germany, or the brown shirts, or whichever one they were, these sort of Hitler's thugs that went around doing all this extrajudicial bullying and intimidating. It's hard to avoid. I mean, there are lots of differences, but it's hard to avoid the historical comparisons with what was happening in Nazi Germany with ICE, these people rampaging around, shooting and arresting and doing horrible stuff. So, as I say, I don't know how widespread the resistance is, but I think even people in the streets are coming out and making some sort of show of defiance.
Yeah,
Saul will be better informed about all that.
Yeah, plus some people are saying that the ICE behave like that because they were trained by the IDF or something like that.
Even if they weren't, they're not vetted properly. These are sort of, thugs that are not trained at all. They take, I don't know how many people, hundreds of people that are hardly qualified for anything. These are people who love to be dressed up in uniforms. This is part of the way that you recruit thugs to do this dirty work.
Okay, so Saul, do you know much about what's happening over there, ICE, and implication for Trump's control over the country in the coming months?
I think all three of us actually are old enough to remember when the Berlin Wall came down. So I always like to, keep hope, and what I'm trying to say is, things can change very dramatically and very suddenly. And, like all of a sudden, like the Berlin Wall came down. How many of us foresaw that. None of us. And I'm not just talking the three of us. You know, there are some international relations experts who are saying, oh, yeah, very predictable. I said blah, blah. This is all lies. Nobody predicted this. Nobody saw this. So look, you never know. I mean, I very much hope things will go take a dramatic turn for the better. I don't know. I don't know whether it will happen. I can tell you what I think are Trump's plans and the plans of him and his, fascist cronies.
Yeah.
I think the midterm elections in 2026, I always felt from already last January that it would be a little bit difficult for them to meddle with that, to interfere with that, because it's just too soon. To try to cancel an election, especially because the United States it's very big. I mean, it's geographically very big. It's sprawling and it's very decentralized in the way that it, organizes elections. So I don't know. But 2028, they have absolutely no intention of holding elections for sure. I mean, that is the plan. The plan is to create some kind of bogus emergency, trump up some kind of, for lack of a better word, some kind of trumped up emergency, and say, okay, it's time of war now and we can't possibly hold elections. That's the intention. Looking at the US media and how they cover, everything that's been going on, it just, American exceptionalism is so ingrained in the psyche of Americans that it's difficult, I think, for many people to see what's happening. Look, you have your masked people, your armed masked thugs are, whisking people off the streets in unmarked cars.
Yeah.
Last I checked, this doesn't happen in democracies, right? But that's what's happening. There's no way, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. This is exactly what's going on. And so 2028, that's the plan. 2026, I think probably the plan was to provoke, mass unrest by sending in the National Guard and ICE, of course, Trump's personal immigration Gestapo, actually more the SS, the Gestapo, because the Gestapo was at least a body of the German state. It was a German political police, but it was a body of the German state. It was not a body of the Nazi party, though, of course, the two sort of, meshed together at a certain point. But the SS was Hitler's personal presidential guard. So that's to me, that's ICE is closer to the SS. But anyway, send in and provoke riots and then say, okay, well, with this mass unrest, there's no way we can hold these midterm elections, so we're going to cancel them. I think what the foolish mistake that they made was that they started sending in the National Guard too soon. What they should have done was they should have waited until, like October or, September or something, and really sort of push people and really try to provoke a response. And then they would have, whether they've been successful or not, I certainly hope not, but that probably would have been more effective from their perspective. But again, petulant the toddler syndrome, and he wanted it now. So I think that's where we are now. I'm not sure. I don't know what's going to happen, but what is definite is that a lot of Americans are very, very unhappy. A lot of Americans are very pissed off with what's happening, and they don't, they don't agree with these kind of foreign adventures. I mean, that's one of the main reasons that a lot of people voted to Trump. May not be the main reason, but it is one of the big reasons. That Americans were sick of endless war, of American lives and treasure being squandered on, wars for Israel in countries that, people can't even point to on a map. People are sick of this, and that's one of the big reasons. So I do very much hope that, that is going to come to the fore, and this resistance is come to
But
the fore.
there are developments that are directly connected to the issue of Palestine. Probably the people like Tucker Carlson and this morning, this afternoon, I was watching an interview between Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly used to be a very pro-Israel, but now she has turned. And she's very popular. She's got a lot of viewership. So if you see people like Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson openly discussing about that it's not in American interest to support Israel, I think this is a big thing in the US. 1 year
It is
ago,
a
you
very
would
big
never
thing.
hear this, right? So what are your
Yes, it
comments?
is that's a very, very big thing, like you're saying. And this was kind of predictable, honestly speaking, because like I said, the MAGA movement, one of the big principles of the MAGA movement was always, we're not going to fight, we're not going to squander American lives and treasure abroad in countries that we have no direct interest to, just for the sake of Israel. I mean, this was always very clear. And Trump foolishly, I think, he's overplayed his hand with regards to this. And he as soon as he assumed office, I mean, not to say that he was ever telling the truth in anything, but you know I think people, a lot of people in the MAGA movement are realizing that this is not what they signed on to. And inshallah, that will be a very big factor in bringing this movement down.
Okay, inshallah.
Yeah.
Any
Can I
comments,
just add quickly something about that? Your point about Tucker Carlson is extremely interesting. I didn't see the latest one you mentioned, but I've been watching Tucker Carlson and even Piers Morgan. Now, these people are the most extreme conservative, right wing, But what's remarkable is firstly, unlike Australian television, they give a lot of time to dissident voices, which you never hear on our public broadcaster. It's a disgrace for our broadcaster, where you have Mearsheimer, you have Jeffrey Sachs, and Tucker Carlson is becoming very dangerous for the American administration. I read a very good article about how he's a smart guy and he's not swallowing a lot of the current propaganda about Palestine and Israel and other adventures that Trump is engaging in, and he's got a huge following. And I read this very remarkable piece about how he's now, he's not on the left, but he's becoming a dissident voice, which is very encouraging because he's got a huge audience, and he's not Mearsheimer or Sachs or some lefty critic. That's a positive sign.
Yeah, and he's very sympathetic to the Palestinians, especially talking about the massacres and killing of children in Gaza.
He's
So,
seeing things clearly, and I have arguments with my son and various people where I don't want to be too enthusiastic because I think Tucker Carlson's not like on the spectrum politically where one wants to be. I think he's been a supporter of MAGA and Trump, but he's now. I mean, just about every interview I see, he interviewed Putin and various other people, and I agreed with everything that was being said. So,
okay,
It's
gentlemen.
strange days when we're agreeing with Tucker Carlson, but it is. I know.
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
I do.
Right.
I'm glad to hear it, Sol.
Yes.
Okay, we are already almost 4 o'clock. So we will stop here. Thank you very much again to both of you for your kind willingness to talk to us and to clarify and to share with us your thoughts about the issues, Bondi Beach, as well as the issues of Venezuela, as well as Iran, and also what's happening in America. We covered a lot of topics today, alhamdulillah. And I'm sure people who are viewing this will feel very enlightened. Thank you again to both of you. Inshallah, see you again.
Thanks, Nazari. Thanks, Sol. Good to see you.
Very much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, good to see you, Peter.